In 1990, Amblin Entertainment released the long-awaited sequel to its 1984 live-action horror comedy called Gremlins. The sequel, titled Gremlins 2: The New Batch, takes place years later in a New York skyscraper that houses Clamp Enterprises. The first film's protagonists, Kate and Billy, played by Phoebe Cates and Zach Galligan, now work in this building and discover that Gizmo has been kidnapped and have become a guinea pig for scientific research. They rescue the cuddly little guy, but when he's left to his own devices and splashed with water, his resulting offspring eat after midnight and set off on an insane adventure where they combine their DNA with other organisms and generally cause a ton of mayhem. On its surface, the sequel to Gremlins feels like a decadent and goofy little movie, but much like the way that Gizmo himself seems to be a paragon of Mogwai serenity, Gremlins 2 has some twisted green hatchlings right below the surface. Under a frivolous veneer of this cinematic masterpiece hides the underpinnings of terrifying nihilism. Submitted for the approval of SYFY Wire's Department of Fan Theory, we present this idea. Gremlins 2: The New Batch does not occur in the opulent backdrop of early 90s New York City, but rather in the aftermath of a Gremlins apocalypse. Ride along as we unpack the secrets of gremlin biomorphology to reveal their true nature. Not the playful ne'er-do-wells we think, but rather highly sophisticated and efficient appropriators of culture. We'll explore the ecosystem created by visionary tycoon Daniel Clamp, and lastly, we'll explore director Joe Dante's cavalier destruction of the fourth wall.
If I were you, I'd run the rest of Gremlins 2 right now. Sorry, folks.
And how he unwittingly creates a vision of the future so dark that even interspecies fornication seems not only reasonable, but inevitable. To start with, we learn pretty quickly in the first movie that gremlins, as a species, have a shocking capacity for reproduction. The rate at which they are able to reproduce viable and immediately sexually mature offspring eclipses even the most fertile modern-day mammals. Consider the house mouse, capable of reproducing 14 offspring every 3 weeks, and then consider that one mogwai can make 14 sexually mature offspring in under 3 minutes. And all they have to do is come in contact with water. This astounding rate of production, plus the fact that the offspring can then immediately reproduce, means that gremlins, in the right conditions, could overwhelm the human population on Earth very quickly. Like, in under half an hour, kind of quickly. In fact, at an optimal rate, it's 2 hours until there are more gremlins than atoms in the known universe. So, a lot. On top of that, gremlin DNA is designed to adapt to harsh and ever-changing environments. In fact, ingesting another organism's DNA is more than enough to trigger a DNA replication cascade. The result is the gremlin host taking on unique attributes of the DNA phenotype it's eaten. For example, the brain gremlin. It ingests brain hormone, whatever that is, and the intelligence it develops is staggering.
I think there are some fascinating ramifications here for the future.
When a gremlin is exposed to another organism's DNA, they're able to manifest dormant traits. This is not so surprising given the hairy mammalian form of the mogwai state and the scaly reptilian form of the gremlin state. These guys are DNA melting pots. Such adaptations typically take millions of years, but for gremlins, that timeline is condensed into seconds. And not only do they have the ability to adapt, they possess the ability to pass on acquired mimetic knowledge onto their offspring. Oh yes, once one gremlin learns something, every future gremlin is born with that knowledge. Look no further than Gizmo's first reproductive cycle. The offspring are not only aware of who he is, but also know the name that was bestowed upon him years ago and are able to verbalize it moments after their birth. Further proof can be found in the Gremlins' knowledge of human pop culture and events that transpired outside of the bubble of Clamp Multiplex. In some cases, decades prior. They know the words to New York, New York.
I wanna be a part of it. New York, New York.
They know nicknames of the city.
The apple. The city's so nice they named it twice.
They're able to construct job-specific outfits at an ungodly pace with the perfect knowledge of what clothing choices are appropriate to a given profession. From the Gremlins' acquired knowledge of their ancestors grants them an acute grasp of all tools ever developed by humans. This, when combined with a staggering work ethic and insatiable appetite for mayhem, makes a gremlin species one of the most incredibly destructive forces in the universe. Nowhere is this more apparent than the musical number performed in the Clamp vestibule. I love that word.
Start spreading the news. I'm leaving today.
In this scene, the Gremlins have somehow designed in excess of 30 bespoke theme-appropriate costumes, constructed a hexagonal lattice of boards that, when combined, create a perfect likeness of the female gremlin Greta, an intricate irising system with a hydraulic lift, staged lighting with smoke. They've even erected a plan to destroy the Statue of Liberty. Days of work performed in minutes. But the real question here is, what motivates the gremlin? Beyond the base needs that they share with all other species, what are they striving towards? What are they putting their efficiency and command of tools and artistry towards? Brain Gremlin is asked this very question in an interview, and his answer is impressively human.
Civilization.
Yes, but what sort of civilization?
The Geneva Convention, chamber music, Susan Sontag. Everything your society has worked so hard to accomplish over the centuries, that's what we aspire to.
They want civilization. The Geneva Convention, chamber music, Susan Sontag. They want to appropriate our culture. But let's also talk about Clamp, the man behind the industry. At the end of the first Gremlins movie, it was apparent that Billy and his ragtag gang had murdered all of the gremlins that have overrun Kingston Falls. Yet, the closing voiceover offers another possibility.
Look under all the beds, because you never can tell. There just might be a gremlin in your house.
What Randall Pelter is offering in the way of hypothetical parable is more than a narrative punctuation to a well-developed story. His warning is a call to action. The gremlin infestation is a very real possibility, and as we've shown, all it would take is one gremlin to escape for all hell to break loose. And that is exactly what this fan theory is proposing, that New York City isn't just the setting for this story. It's the last holdout of humanity existing in a post-Gremlin apocalypse. Think about this. When the Futtermans arrive in New York, Mr. Futterman exclaims,
"We wanted to call you, but we had to get on a Greyhound."
32 hours.
32 hours by Greyhound to get to NYC from Kingston Falls, New York. Kingston Falls may be fictitious, but it's still in New York State. Even the most distant city wouldn't take over 10 hours by car. Either the Futtermans hit the world's worst traffic, or it now takes that long to drive to New York City with a Gremlin apocalypse affecting travel times outside of the city limits. Nonsense, you say? The Futtermans are just typical happy-go-lucky tourists itching for a taste of the big city life, you say, or they? Or do they offer a unique perspective as outsiders, giving us a peek behind the veil of what life is like outside of New York? A deeper look at their behavior reveals two mentally unstable individuals who are incapable of accepting their reality. Ready? Murray Futterman clearly suffers from PTSD, which has only been exacerbated by his experience with the Gremlins from the first movie.
Remember what Dr. Kaplan said? We're going to be nice and calm. Murray was a little distressed after, you know what happened with those.
He's jumpy, paranoid, and still coping with the stress of his trauma. Sheila, meanwhile, is in full-blown denial. Her vacant stare and lack of emotional range typify someone who is hanging on by a thread. She no longer sees the Gremlins at all, but has incorporated them into a rose-tinted world. And note this line from Murray.
If these guys get out there in the rain, the city's going under for the third time.
1990s New York City hadn't been involved in 2 wars. Just one, the Revolutionary War. So the truth is that this is not the first time that Gremlins have attempted to invade New York City. He's talking about a city that has already defended itself from Gremlins and remained under human control because of the supervision of visionary defense mastermind Daniel Clamp. Clamp has essentially built a nuclear fallout bunker in his Regency trade and shopping concourse. Clamp's logo is a globe being crushed. His book is called
I Took Manhattan.
Clamp's building is a self-proclaimed smart building brimming with advanced experimental technologies that one would only find in a dystopian future.
I have a potential violator, sir.
Automatic revolving doors, FaceTime video technologies for conference calls, self-cleaning ashtrays. Clamp remembers the past. He remembers what once was and is not afraid to look back and wax nostalgic. But when Clamp is holed up in his ivory tower and looking out over the Manhattan skyline, the reflection of his telescope shows the top of the Chrysler Building. Yet, when the camera pulls away, the blinds are closed. Light is streaming in, but the telescope is pointing directly at closed blinds. In this moment, Clamp is not admiring the New York City skyline, but merely ruminating on a bygone era. Clamp's existential crisis personified in a telescope that looks out upon nothing. He knows that the world is over, an eventuality that he has, in fact, already prepared for. Later, when Clamp's building has been overrun, he recruits Billy into his inner sanctum to formulate a game plan, but not before showing Billy an apocalyptic end-of-the-world message he has already filmed for his television viewers.
Because of the end of civilization, the Clamp cable network now leaves the air. We hope you have enjoyed our programming, but more importantly, we hope you have enjoyed life.
Is it possible that Clamp created this video because he doesn't see the Gremlin threat against humanity as a threat at all, but an eventuality? Perhaps the most damning evidence is the gene splicing company that resides in the building. This place is a state-of-the-art scientific laboratory that has solved some of the most complex scientific conundrums present in modern-day science. They have figured out a way to communicate with and understand lower life forms.
Calm and centered. I enjoy giving milk.
And are making very real strides in human cloning.
How's the cloning work coming along?
Really well, Doctor.
When the Gremlins have taken over the research facility, one particularly enterprising gremlin accesses their stores of acid. Why would they label these beakers with the warning, acid, do not pour on face? The subtext here is that among the employees at Splice of Life, throwing acid on their own faces was becoming a real problem. Has life on Earth become so dire that death by acid face melting is the only way out? In a Gremlin apocalypse, perhaps. Yet, all of the evidence that we presented is pretext. To understand this terrifying nihilistic vision, we have to bring to light director Joe Dante's systematic breakdown of the fourth wall. The point that separates you, the viewer, from the action on screen. Get ready, because this is the most impressive part. As a viewer, you are not watching Gremlins 2: The New Batch. You are watching a theater of moviegoers who are watching Gremlins 2, The New Batch. Is your mind blown? Here's the breakdown. The Gremlin invasion of Clamp's multiplex reaches a fever pitch, and Splice of Life lies in tatters after Gremlins have destroyed it. Billy presses Dr. Catheter for the whereabouts of the escaped Gremlins, when suddenly the film begins to burn up. Gremlins appear on the screen and start making finger puppets. Again, the Gremlins' knowledge of Abe Lincoln, a president that was in office over 100 years ago, provides additional evidence of the Gremlins' hive mind, not to mention a staggering manual dexterity. So, the Gremlins have taken over the movie theater, or your television, or where you're watching, and replaced Gremlins 2, The New Batch, with their choice film, which is called Volleyball Holiday and seems, delightful. But check out the reaction of the audience watching the film.
We have gremlins in the projection booth. Could you help us? Gremlins? In this theater? Now?
Because there is no reaction. They continue watching as though nothing has happened. And this is perhaps the scariest of all. The Gremlin Apocalypse is present in this world, and it is not the crumbling buildings and overcast skies that we normally associate with the end of the world. It is instead a world where gremlins have ingrained themselves into the fabric of society, along with Hulk Hogan. Human control of the world as we know it has ended. It's a Gremlin Apocalypse, and Billy, Kate, and Clamp, and all of the rest of us are trying to survive as best as we can. Think we're wrong? Try to prove the movie doesn't take place in a terrifying Gremlin Apocalypse in the comments. But then hide, because it totally did.